Hello, welcome to Take Me Back. This is a show where locals come in and we chat. They tell me their memories of the Mad River Valley, and inevitably it goes in directions we are not expecting, but it's always fun to do it. Today I welcome my neighbor and friend, Tony Egan. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm delighted that you agreed to come.
Yeah.
Scary,
but
it is. Well, it's always, what I'm finding is it's always scary to put yourself out there, right? But people are giving us nice feedback. So I am holding up the Take Me Back book, which I have shown you many times, which is our fundraising tool. And we're doing very well with it. In the book is this beautiful young couple. Look how young they are. And this is Tony and his late wife, Donna, who he adored.
Yeah, Donna was 21 in that picture.
21. So why don't you start there? I mean, you were coming from Manhattan, right?
Yep.
How did that happen?
Well, I changed right about the same time I met Donna. I had just changed jobs, and I was a madman on Madison Avenue in the advertising business. And I had been at my first job long enough to be vested in their retirement plan. So when I moved to another ad agency, I found myself in my early 20s with $5,000. And I thought I'd be really smart because I was a skier. I'd buy some land in the Mad River Valley. So we came up here, the two of us, just the first year after we met, looking for a piece of land, and ended up buying a house instead.
And talk about, I know this story, but the viewers do not. Tell the story of finding the house.
Well, we somehow got involved with Hap Gaylord at
Hap Gaylord of the Gaylord
right.
Farm.
And he said, we said, because I guess we had been pulled out of a ditch a couple of times or something over the first winter we were coming out. I was in a ski house with Donna. It was the house that is now that big ski shop on the access road just below the Sugar Bush Inn.
Sure.
On the right. I forget what it's called now, but that was the ski house one winter back in the 60s. There were like 20 different people who paid a few $100s each to have a bed there, and I was one of them.
Right.
So we were up skiing, and so Hap said, "I'll find you a piece of land." And I borrowed a small convertible from somebody, and he sat up, had the top down. He was sitting. I lived in Manhattan. He was sitting in the back, up on the trunk, like Hap does, like
he did in the parade.
In the parade, exactly, and driving around. And we were up at the top of the Roxbury Gap and around the valley. And he didn't really know as much about what was for sale as he thought he did, but it was a beautiful day. And we drove past this little house on North Facein Road, right at the corner of Randall Road and North Facein Road by the schoolhouse and the cemetery in North Facein. And on the tree right out in front of this tiny little house was a circle that had been cut out of a countertop, and it had "for sale" with a paintbrush on the circle. So we stopped, and it was the house, and it was $5,000. So
what was it like?
It was the Vermont farmhouse, and Bernie and Dodie Dunbar were living there. And interestingly enough, the mortgage was actually held by Arthur Williams, turned out.
Arthur, I'm finding out in this
everywhere.
endeavor that he had a lot of investments going on.
He was everywhere. He was just helping them out. They weren't unable, to get bank money. And so he was helping them out. And they wanted to move on somewhere. And anyway, that's how we met Arthur. And it also turned out that because there are only a few hundred people in the world, Arthur taught my wife Donna how to swim at the Weston Field Club in Weston, Connecticut, back in the late 1940s.
No.
So
that is crazy.
It's bizarre.
It is a small world, very much a small
really
world.
Is. So anyway, we ended up buying the house, and I got a mortgage for. The only people who'd give us any money was Northfield Savings Bank. I've been with them for 50, 60 years, commercial, nice people. and $68 a month for a few $1,000s to help pull the place together a little better
Do some repairs.
and make it livable. And I sold off bunk beds to friends for a couple $100 a winter for the first few years.
Did you?
And to help make it all work.
Right.
And that's how it happened. And then one Sunday night, I came up every weekend from Manhattan, year-round, to work on the house. I bought a saw and a drill and a book on electricity and a book on plumbing and learned how to do all that stuff. And because I didn't have the money to do it or to have somebody else do it.
Right.
And then one Sunday night, after another long, hard-working weekend, I drove into a tree on the way back to New York, fell asleep at the wheel. So we just decided we were lucky.
Where was the road?
In Orwell, Route 22A, Orwell, Vermont. I just fell asleep. I was so exhausted. And luckily, the car that I was driving, we had bought a Volkswagen variant station wagon that had just come over from Europe, and it had a shoulder belt. Otherwise,
That is very lucky.
I would be very dead.
Yeah.
Otherwise, and the shoulder belt saved my life. My wife was asleep in the back seat lying down, so she was okay. The cat went out the window, and we thought it was gone forever, and 3 weeks later, after coming back to Vermont and putting posters everywhere, we got a phone call.
No kidding.
Our cat had turned up at a barn near Orwell somewhere, so that was fortuitous. We got the cat back and then decided we had to either get rid of the place in Vermont or move up. And so our parents' family thought we were nuts.
I bet they did.
Yeah, going from a three-piece suit on Madison Avenue and martini lunches to Vermont. It took 2 years to find a job. Ended up at Glen Ellen doing PR, advertising, marketing, that kind of stuff.
So Donna was in her 20s.
Donna was in her 20s.
And how old were you?
5 years older. So
5
she
years
was
older.
21 when we bought the house. I was 26. And she was sort of a freelance secretary because she was a good typist and do all that stuff. And I was at Glen Ellen for 3 years. And then with state government for 6 years in tourism. And then a bunch of stuff over the years.
I'm going to turn off my phone. I should have done that.
I don't have a cell phone.
Talk about your job at Glen Ellen, because I find that very interesting.
Well, I was there first. It was a 3-man staff, more or less, when I got there. Walt Elliott, who built it and developed it, somebody who worked on the lifts, and the person in charge of the food. So there's a food guy, a lift guy, and Walt. And I became the fourth person. So the PR and the marketing and the complaints and the hand-holding and the media and all that kind of stuff. And Walt and I ended up not getting along very well. We just were different people. And so it didn't work out well, and he ended it just as I was on my third final interview with the state to go be with state government and do tourism there, and that worked out just fine. So that was my introduction.
When you walked in here today, it was an interesting moment for you because you hadn't been in this particular space since you owned the business.
The Blue Toe. My wife started, we ended up, I mentioned that I just looked at Gussie Graves' interview here, and we ended up buying a couple of acres from the Hobarts, who owned the land right across the street and including all GMVS, which of course became their world. So we ended up building a house on Gussie's old farm. What was my point? Oh, the work. We built the house, and then the second year we added a greenhouse. And then the third year I did some math and looked at how much it cost to heat the greenhouse and got hysterical. And I said to Donna, can't we just sell a few plants out of our greenhouse to help pay for the oil? And she said, okay. She was at home with a little baby. So we put a sign at the bottom of the driveway, called it the Blue Toad. I don't know why. And our logo of the blue toad was from a ceramic toad that we had. My wife had a toad and frog collection of ceramics and stuff.
Was the baby Catherine or Michael?
The baby was Michael. He was born in the car on the way to the hospital in 68. We moved up in 67. So she was at home anyway, and we sold some plants from our home greenhouse just to pay for the oil. And then it just, as things do, it just grew like topsy. I was complaining about only making $30 a week. And the Reeses at that point owned a building right across the street from the village square that had a business called Kids Clothes, children's clothing, the toy store, which sold toys, Odd Teaks, which was, what's his name? I lose names more and more nowadays. Anyway, there was a store called Odd Teaks selling odd teak type junk stuff. And there was an extra room. And the Reeses said, why don't you rent this room for us and move from your home greenhouse? They were over for dinner. And do it down there. And 1 week later, we opened down there. And we're there for a year watching people drive by, at which point we realized we had to move. And at that point, the old high school was being made into retail businesses, the person who owned it, because Harwood had just been built a few years earlier. And so we moved into the old high school and had the whole big room on the right with we had a fountain going, and we had I had made a tape loop of jungle noises and,
that's great.
Plants everywhere. It was wonderful. It was really fun. And then we slipped into flowers and ended up, the Village Square people came to us because they wanted to build the buildings at the north end. They didn't exist originally.
So where we sit now?
Where we sit now,
exist.
They wanted what they called an anchor for this building that we're in right now. So the bookstore became the anchor of the building it's in now. The liquor store became the anchor of the northern building, and this building, the southern building of the north end of the shopping center, was us, and next door was Judy Dodds with a business called Tulip Tree, and then right on the corner was a silversmith, a jewelry maker person, and then the bookstore and whatever.
Somebody asked me a question the other day, and I forgot to ask Tom. The question was, did it just start with Mehruon's? Because I know Elmer, he was insistent he was going to own Mehruon's and not rent.
Right.
Did the building begin with that corner or the whole strip? That's what I need to find out.
I do not know, because the whole strip where Mehruon's is now, and the southern strip, and then the strip that's parallel with Route 100, those three were already there.
When you came?
When the developer came to us and the bookstore people and said, we want to add more buildings on the north end of the shopping center. Would you be interested? And we all said yes, at which point the old high school emptied, because it was full of retail businesses. Across the street, across the hall from the Blue Toad was a fabric store, Odds and Ends. No, anyway, there was a place selling fabric, and the bookstore was upstairs. It was a branch of the bookstore in Middlebury.
No kidding.
Called the Bookstore.
Yeah.
And that was upstairs. And the Rayfields were not involved at that point. It was owned by the Middlebury people. Mm-hmm. And there was a leather store. I forget, was it Sewell Williams had a little sort of open store in the end of the hallway. It wasn't behind a door, and it was a tack shop. So he sold tack because that was in the heydays of the Sugar Bush Polo Club
And the fox hunt.
And the fox hunt, right, the Green Mountain Hounds.
I say that because Donna was so pivotal.
She was a real horse person.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. So that's why the shopping people came to us, because we had started across the street and then been in the old high school, and we needed more space. And that's when we got into basically 50% house plants and flowers and weddings and funerals and all that kind of stuff, and 50% gifts and candy and cards and shop. Roughly half our business came from the locals. The other half of the business came from second homeowners and tourists.
So I am interested. I mean, you were leading a New York lifestyle. You were in the heart of
Oh, yeah.
the artsiest, most cultured place in the world.
Oh,
How did
yeah.
you know you were going to be able to survive in the culture, I mean?
Emotionally, one of the well, we knew we had to do something because we were going to die otherwise after that accident.
So it never occurred to you to give up the skiing?
No, because
That
I
was
was
a huge
I was a
motivator.
skier. Yeah,
Yeah.
I started when I was 6 years old in Canada. I've been skiing 80 years. Not as well as you would think after all that time, but I can be pretty
Yeah.
at least. Back in the old days when you had to keep your legs together, my father would put a dollar bill between my knees, and if I could get down to the bottom with it still there, it was mine.
That's an interesting technique. Why were you
it worked.
skiing in Canada?
I don't know. That's where we went a couple times. Well, when we lived in Manhattan, my parents had a car in Manhattan. We actually drove to Vermont on vacation. Sometime we would go skiing, night skiing at Fonstalk State Park, right outside, an hour and a half from Manhattan during the week sometimes. And my parents are skiing in the 30s. They were just part of the set who sort of got into skiing. And what was your question again?
Oh, I just wondered why you were in Canada.
Oh,
so it was just something
Tremblant,
different.
Saint-Gevite,
Yeah.
I said Mont Gabriel and Saint-Gevite and some of the earlier places. But I remember skiing at Stowe in the late 40s and getting 2 runs in the spring, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, because the line was 6 abreast for one single chairlift going all the way down to the parking lot.
Wow.
I mean, this was in the early days, before any of the other stuff. Single
Yeah.
chair and rope tows.
If they started in the 30s, that is early for American skiing.
Yeah, yeah. And anyway, so one of the things that made me feel it was going to work out was the liquor store was run back then by Mert Kingsbury. And it was where the eye care place is now, which had also been Inverness Ski Shop, and it's had a whole bunch of different lives right across from the store, Jackie's place.
Right.
And,
Which is Addison West now.
Addison West,
Yeah.
right. So we were in Mertz, and it was always a long line in the liquor store. You had to wait here, but they also had a tiny little deli selling, like VG, a little bit of deli stuff. And there on the shelves were cans of snails, escargot, with a plastic tube on top that had the empty shells in it. And I saw it, and I thought, I'm in the middle of nowhere, Vermont, and the liquor store is selling escargot. This has got to be an okay place. I mean, I had really a gut reaction to it because I lived in Manhattan and was carried away with myself, the way a young person on Madison Avenue tends to be.
That is part of our story. I hear
Yeah.
it. I hear it from Tom how there weren't distributors who could easily bring those things. Right. So Carol Lippincott at the Warren store. That
Yep.
part of the growth was them figuring out how to get this cool food here.
Yeah, and I always given the highest marks you can give to Mehruons for having, and your stepson is doing a super job.
He's my actual son.
Actually, that's right. It was.
He's Tommy's
There
stepson.
are too many families going around. And by the way, I told you that I saw your interview with Gussie.
Yes.
I think the guy who was doing the meat before Elmer was named Sam.
Sam. I know.
think.
I know Max.
Skinny guy.
Max Shaw would sometimes. He did the deliveries, but sometimes he cut meat.
But I
come
remember
across that.
defeathering chickens, and I'll tell you, boiling water, but it stinks.
Does it?
It's the worst smell in the world.
Now, why were you boiling chickens?
I went to a camp that was as a kid and from the city, I went to summer camp actually this was a camp in Madison, Connecticut. And on Sundays we'd have fried chicken, but everybody participated in fried chicken Sundays.
No kidding.
We'd go and catch the chickens, and I was old enough and big enough that I could participate. And we'd go down to this big gully off the ball field, and they'd chop off the heads, and chickens really do run around like a chicken with its head cut off. They would be gutted and defeathered right there, and so they'd have a big pot of boiling water, and I would participate in that, and then up to the kitchen where the kitchen staff would clean them out and fry them. And
so when you put them in the boiling water, they smell. What do they smell like?
Like wet feathers.
Well, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, weird, but it was a terrible, terrible smell. Anyway, that's how I knew about chicken feathers.
You saw the escargot. You know, there were signs, and you love to ski. So
yeah,
that's a big
I love
plus.
to ski. Yeah. I was a Mad River skier. Then I ended up working at Glen Ellen. My only connection with Mad River was I had to go over every single day and count the cars in the parking lot. Walt insisted on that. Both Sugarbush and Mad River count the cars in the parking lot.
Why?
He wanted the information. He was absolutely. That was part of Walt's personality.
Yeah.
And I never minded at Mad River because Texas staff had the best chocolate chip cookies in the world. They were so good. So that was always an excuse to pick up a couple of cookies. And anyway, so my heart was at Mad River. I worked at Glen Ellen. Now the last 15 years, Sugarbush, because of it's easier.
It's easier to ski
It's
there.
easier to ski there.
Yeah.
It's the bottom line. And I've slowed down. I've been skiing so long that, sure, I love it, but if the weather, the snow, and the people aren't just right during the week, no people, perfect snow, no ice, sunny weather, temperature in the low 30s, I don't have to drive very far, you know. I have to drive a mile and a half further now than I used to. So.
It works out.
Oh, and one other thing I have to say, in case Gussie ever gets to see this, she said she sold her house a few years ago, and that the people who bought it did a really, really, really good job. And it was so interesting to hear this. And Gussie, if you hear this, I don't know if you know already, but the people who bought my house a year ago, it's gone.
The house is gone?
Gone.
They're going to build from scratch?
I got a stupid amount of money, and it's gone. They widened the driveway, and it's just a hole in the dirt.
So they want the property.
Well, I took their architect through it about a week after we shook hands, and he came back with some interesting ideas, and I walked around with the buyer and him, and they were going to take out the ceiling here and open that up and put an addition on here, stuff.
Right.
Big design build firm from Stowe. And so I thought they were going to, add this and take off that and blah, blah, blah. And I guess things changed.
That's very interesting.
Just a hole in the dirt. I'm interested to see.
When I go to Bruce's house in Glenview, right,
Yeah.
I tend to come up one way, and then I'll go home by going back around by GMBS.
You go downhill. To come back, you go down down Glenview.
Down to Moulton.
Yeah, well, it's the
I don't know why I do that, but
it's the last drive on the left before the school. You'll see the big empty driveway going up on your left.
I will be watching.
And you can see the soccer field down at the bottom of the hill. Yeah, you can tell. It's wider and whatever, and you can peek
well,
at
this is an interesting time. People buying homes sight unseen.
Right.
they feel lucky to find anything to buy at this point.
When it went on the market last year on February 17th, there was only one other house on the market in the valley. Big
Is that
house.
true? Oh my gosh.
That's what the real estate agent told me. Yeah.
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 So you were
One
lucky.
other
You were
house,
lucky
very
to
lucky.
sell.
And yeah, 2 people wanted it, which is always a good thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was all over in a day, basically.
And now you're my
So-
neighbor.
And now I'm your neighbor, right? And I happen to own another property where my daughter used to live and had her daycare business. And so I'm in there now, and it's fine.
It's perfect, isn't it? I mean, it's so
Right.
convenient to
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah, it really is. It's right downtown.
And we're
Yeah.
Tom and I are already wanting to be on one floor, right? I mean,
Well,
you have
this
that
is
now.
it's a 2,000 square foot double wide.
Right.
So I only have to go up 3 steps, and everything's on one floor.
Exactly. So it's beautiful.
Yeah. And worst comes to worst, I can always go up those 3 steps on my butt if I have to.
You
you know?
have to.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the fox hunt, because to me this is such a colorful part of our history. Of course, I wasn't here then, but I still
Right.
feel like it's our history. So how did it begin? And
I do not know. My wife was the horse person. She grew up as the horse person. A short story of why there are only 200 people in the world. The person who bought my house, within a few weeks, he had rented a house a few hundred yards away from somebody who I knew because his daughter was running the Vermont Adaptive Ski and Sports program at Sugarbush. She was the coordinator for VAST, and that was his daughter. And he had lost his wife a few years ago, and he bought this little house right at the end of Moulton Road. And so the guy who bought my house, looking towards not going to do anything for a year, he rented that house for the winter because his son was going to attend GMVS. That guy who lost his wife a few years ago had a new girlfriend who was my wife's very best friend in in Weston, Connecticut when they were like 8, 9, 10 years old.
oh my gosh,
I mean, that's ridiculous.
mind-boggling.
Right?
It is.
Yeah,
It is.
ridiculous. Anyway, so and that's because she also was a horse person, and my wife was a horse person. She grew up. She had a horse when she was a young girl, and she was the one who rode around the house with the broomstick between her legs. You know, that kind of horse person. And so when we moved up here, the year after we bought this little farmhouse, I was able to work out a way to buy the little barn next door. When we bought the farmhouse, it was 0 land. It was just the house footprint and the 30 or 40 feet around it. There's a tiny little barn right next to it, and that came with 30 acres of land.
Oh boy.
And again, for nothing, practically. In fact, after reading the Take Me Back story that, what's her name, Hall wrote, you know, George and Sally Hall's daughter.
Oh, Lee
yeah,
Delphos'
yeah,
sister.
Lee's thing when they
Yeah.
bought that
And she
house
would
for-
ride everywhere in
Yeah.
the valley.
Anyway, so Donna was able to have a horse, and she would just ride it around the neighborhood kind of thing, and then got involved when she discovered the hunt, which was already in existence, and that's where she joined, and then became good friends with someone who had a trailer who would come to our place to pick up the horse.
So when you say it was already in existence, were there any people that we would know the names? Because part
Well,
of
the
it was
Benjamins were very much involved.
Yeah.
Jane Hobart,
Yes.
she and Donna, and of course we ended up, by the early 70s, we ended up neighbors because we bought our land across the street from GMVS from the Hobarts. And so she and Jane became good friends because they were both horse people. And actually, Jane had a barn up above Glenview, and Donna kept her horse there after we built the house, selling the place because we had a second child. We had a daughter 3 years after our son was born in '68. And we really needed, because the farmhouse we were in was a tiny little house, and we needed more room. And we were able to sell. By then, things were starting to appreciate. So we could sell the land in North Facein and the house in North Facein. And it worked out that we could, build across from GMVS.
So you built that house?
We built the house, yeah. We built it in 72 or 3, something like that. And then put a big addition on about 25 years later. Then the kids grew up, moved away, and there we were, living.
As will happen.
Yeah, and then I lost my wife, and there I was living in 1,200 square feet of a giant house. So, but luckily I had a place to go and stay in the valley.
Yeah, absolutely.
And my peers complain all the time about that. Those of us, I'm 87, so those of us that are left, they need a place to go if they want to stay here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those of us who spend a lot of time here want to stay here.
And we talk about the housing crisis all the time, but I don't hear a lot of discussion about that issue, that older folks, really, you kind of need to downsize. I'm in a house right now. My kids are all...
You have a big house.
My children are all successful men, and
Yep.
It's empty, and it's...
Yep.
It's too much.
Well,
it's too much.
If I was going to say if one of you goes first, most likely, I can laugh about it all now because, listen, once it's around the corner, I'm very sanguine about the whole thing. It's a cycle of life. But anyway, if one of you finds yourself all alone there, you're going to go nuts.
Yeah.
Because
it's too much.
You don't. I mean, it's crazy.
But then, as you say...
Nobody wants brown furniture.
But as you say, where do you go? Because I don't want to leave the valley. Bruce is here. Our youngest son is a doctor.
Right.
He wants to come back to Vermont. I want to be near them.
Yeah.
And my friends, right? Mm-hmm. So I get it.
Yeah. So that's the way it's worked out.
Do you ever, you've been here a long time. You have
We
lived...
bought the house 60 years ago.
60.
I mean, we first came up here. Yeah, we bought that little house in North Facein in '63. So it's been 60 years.
How do you see raising children here? What advantage was it versus you could have had all the fancy private schools in New York and all that?
I couldn't afford them. I was just at the beginning of a career. Everything in New York, even back then, cost a fortune. Well, when we moved up, we were sort of in the second wave of downcountry people from away who were discovering the valley. The first group came up in the 40s and 50s, and that was the people who liked the Gads and Sugar Bush and
Arthur
and the Williamses and that whole group, Gene Sherman, and I don't remember everybody's name now, most of those people are now in the halls, and most of those people are all gone.
Yeah.
And then there was the second group that we were part of, which came up in the 60s. And that was sort of the beginning with Prickly and the hippies and I still have all my tie-dye shirts that I still wear.
The early ski bums.
The early ski bums. I was never a ski bum. I already started a career in New York that I was able to transfer up to here in a fashion, and then found my own way doing other stuff. But when our kids were born, and they were born in the late 60s and early 70s, there was not much around. I mean, there was daycare. When we had the Blue Toad at the old high school, underneath the right-hand stairwell that went up to the second floor, we closed off and made a little cubby where our son could go after school and read a book, or I don't know if we were able to get a little TV in there or something. I don't think It was TV, but there was a place for him to go because there wasn't much daycare around. There was up at Sugarbush, which he actually went. Judy Reese ran that after school, and Donna was a stay-at-home until the Blue Toad took off. And
Right.
by then there was other things around. The kids had started kindergarten. Our son's kindergarten class had one other person in it. At Fayston School, there were 32 people in the Fayston School when we were ready.
Yeah.
And at one point, they wanted to tear it down and build a whole new school because things were growing so fast. And then all of a sudden, there were only 60 kids in the Fayston School.
Right.
And then they're back to 100 again. It's, like
It's
this.
very up and down.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So the children.
And the kids now, I see them hanging out. And when our kids were teenagers, I don't know. I was busy working one way or another.
Yeah.
And Donna sort of did it all. I was not as much a hands-on father as I probably should have been. And we're still working that out. The way parents do.
The kids skied, obviously.
Yeah, but they never really fell in love with it. Catherine, our daughter, was just nervous about it.
Uh-huh.
And Michael did somewhat. Because there was this after-school ski program.
Right.
But he never fell in love with it, and he wanted to be a skier, the way many people we knew did.
Were they into the horses?
No. That never took. I mean, they were both been on horseback, but that's because Donna would put them on the horse and
Right.
take a picture. But they never got into that as much. And neither of them were big on sports. I don't know, it all just sort of happened. And it happened so fast,
Yeah.
that it's like a blur when I think back.
Well, I think just being in the country is a unique opportunity for kids. You can go in the woods and find a mossy patch and create a little village for trolls or whatever children do,
Yeah, they would walk down. The school bus picked them up at the end of Moulton Road and Bragg Hill, and they would walk from the house down through the woods, where we would occasionally see barbed wire from when Gussie was a kid and it was a farm with cows across the road, I guess. But we would still find barbed wire fence, the remains of fencing in the hill. They'd go down through the woods and walk along Moulton Road and wait for the bus at the end. See an occasional bear. We used to get a lot of raccoons. We don't anymore. The raccoons have disappeared from that part of Glenview Road.
Interesting.
Though I don't live there anymore. I was going to say that they've disappeared. No, I don't know. I haven't been there for a year.
Let's talk about, you just celebrated a huge anniversary of an organization that you helped found, which is the Mad River Corral.
Right.
The 30th, right? The
Yep.
30th anniversary.
Yep.
And I think this is a fascinating story. It's the story of, as so often happens here, people creating their own culture.
Yep.
Right? So talk about how that all happened.
Well, the way that happened was in talking to the Hobarts, and Jane, I think, was teaching down at the school at that point, but they had already started with the campus. They had an English teacher, and I think she taught German, but I'm not sure. But she was definitely an English teacher.
At different points taught everything. She taught
not Jane.
languages.
No, I'm talking about Danica.
Danica.
A woman by the name of Danica Buckley, who was an English teacher and I think a music. I don't really know how strong their music program. I think they already started doing the musical, and she was involved with that.
Okay.
But I think she was basically an English teacher, and maybe German, but I don't remember now. It was 30 years ago. But I remember Jane telling me that Danica was taking conducting lessons, and she was interested in trying to form some kind of a singing group. And I had been very involved in the choir when I was in high school. I only had 2 years of college, and I was not there. But in high school, and my girlfriend all through high school was the voice. She had an incredible soprano. She went on semi-professionally for a while. But I loved singing. I loved singing in my high school singing group, and I was in a smaller concert group also. And I hadn't sung a note for 30 years or however long it had been since high school. So when Jane said Danica's would like to form some kind of singing group, I said, I can do that. So it turned out that Danica had been collecting names and contact information of people who were interested in singing. So I ran some ads in the paper, in the classified, saying wanting to form a singing group. And I think I designed some stationery and a logo or something, I said,
Yeah.
I can make this happen. And we collected like 20 odd names, between 20 and 30 names of people who were interested. And at that time, I was also on the board of the Green Mountain Cultural Center, which was an attempt to do theater, performing arts type stuff up at the Round Barn under the Simcoes, who were interested in doing stuff up there in the summer because they had skiers in the winter. They hadn't developed any wedding business yet. That was to come. They were looking for stuff to go on, so
Right.
they created, and there was a lot of wonderful cultural stuff going on up there. There was some opera and theater and all kinds of stuff. So I was on the board, and I said to the board, if we can get some money, if you will give me some money, I think I can create a singing group, and we would love to have our opening performance here at the Round Barn. And they said, okay. And I think it was $600, either $400 or $600 to pay for music and to have some money to pay Danica as the choral director, to pay an accompanist because we needed, and I think Joan Foster was our first accompanist. And so Danica and I think Joan on the piano, and we met in the cafeteria at Green Mountain Valley School. There were 24, I believe there were 24 of us, with a fairly reasonable balance of the soprano, alto, tenor, bass, interestingly enough. And we took on Vivaldi's Gloria, which is a real warhorse of the choral, easy choral piece that people are familiar
Very
with.
well known.
Very well known, easy
Yes.
to learn-ish kind of thing. And so we did it. And then at the last minute, they said, we really ought to have instruments. And I went out and I went into some businesses and got, $100 from this business and $50 from this business. I don't even remember who they all were now. And we were able to pull together 4 or 5 musicians. And all I remember now was that Andreas Lerner, from Warren, who was the principal.
He was the principal for a long time.
At the high school, yeah. And he played the cello. And so I remember he was part of it. And whether it was through him or I don't know how we found him, but we ended up with 4 or 5 musicians and 24 singers and Danica directing. And we did another piece plus Vivaldi's Gloria. And it was a smash hit. So we decided, hey, we ought to try and make this work.
Exactly.
And so that's sort of what happened for a couple of years. And then Danica left the Valley, or was planning to leave GMVS. And at which point I went, now what are we going to do? And Jane was very much part of this whole thing, helping me sort of organize the thing. She was there in the very beginning. Jane, Freddie Malman, I don't remember all the other people, but we had a bunch of people. We got some people from outside the Valley, too. I don't remember how that happened, but we did. But it was always between 25 and 30 or 35 people-ish, sort of. And then we discovered Piero Bonamico, who came on board for almost 20 years. He had just graduated from Eastman School of Music, was looking for a job. And so I don't even remember now how we found him. Oh, we went to Arthur Zorn, who was head of the music department at the high school in Barry. And he said, I have a student who just graduated from Eastman's looking for a job. He's a genius. He's A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And he came over to the house, and it was a perfect spring day, and the flowers and the hummingbirds, and we had a nice house. And he looked around and thought, this is okay. I like this. A nice, bright, super bright, talented kid from Barry.
Yes.
And he's what helped build it and make it happen. And it had a long, complicated history. We were at the Bundy for 5 years. Still don't know how that happened.
I didn't realize
that. We rented it after Dave died, and his son Michael basically owned the Bundy. We rented it from him for $1 a year. Smart on his behalf because we got to pay for the mowing. There was a lot of mowing. And the heat and everything. And we somehow, through Piero's aggressive, intensive personality, made it all happen somehow. That we did have a 5-year lease and we were able to pay the taxes, and we had all kinds of interesting stuff there, fundraisers and theater and performances, and we performed there. And we had some outside 30. We did Circus Smirkus a couple of years. We had some world-class musicians, a couple of them that Piero ginned up somehow, who performed there, and it was a good time. And at one point, we had 100 people at Harwood, with 3 or 4 different singing groups. We were combined with a group over the mountain that Piero knew the director. And we had a kids choir, and then Piero and his wife, they had a teenage thing, a choir group with 40 or 50 people. It was just dizzy, but it all held together. At one point, we had 15 people on the board of directors.
Oh my gosh, that's a lot.
Piero was ready to buy. We didn't almost buy, but he had worked out a detailed plan of how to buy the movie theater. He was going to buy the Mad Bush and turn it into a year-round music camp and tie it in with the Bundy, which we were going to buy, and turn into a world-class performance space. And Piero thought big. And then he moved on. And anyway, we are where we are now with Mary Jane Austin, who's terrific. She was our accompanist for some years, very talented. And she's our current leader. I'm still on the board. And I have the title of president only because I told Jane I would if she would do all the work. And she's doing all the work. She's great. She's the glue that makes everything work. And I get to talk about it, but she makes it work. Yeah. And it's fun. And we sing. We start rehearsals in 2 weeks. Everybody's welcome. It's not auditioned. All you have to do is be able to carry a tune.
Where do you rehearse?
We rehearse in the Harwood Music Room every Monday night, 7 to 9.
Oh, nice. That's great that they allow that space for you.
Yep. They've been wonderful.
It is interesting that, I wrote, for listeners, I wrote a Take Me Back article about the 30th anniversary and the celebrating, and I learned a lot. I hadn't realized that you had all these different permutations, these different programs.
It was really under I don't have the exact right word for Piero yet, but he was a very talented guy.
Yeah.
Both in the visual arts and the performing arts. We would do fundraisers where he would do a whole hour-long program of Italian singing at the movie theater. And we're still doing interesting stuff.
He's I'll tell you my Piero story. So he also, I'm not sure how long he was at GMVS doing the musicals. He was the musical director.
Oh, yes.
And my classroom was above his practice room.
Okay.
Okay? And I don't think that there was enough insulation in the ceiling because he would get so worked up. And he would work with these children one-on-one and really try to bring the best out of them. But he was really intense. Sometimes we say, "Ah, rah, rah, rah." I'd hear him pounding and yelling.
Forceful.
And I'm a math teacher, right? So I would just, I'm pointing, and we just stop. and let it pass. And it got to be such a habit. It was hilarious.
A very intense
Yeah.
young man. Yeah, except he's now.
But he would always bring the best out.
Oh yes.
And I was a ballet dancer, so
Oh, really?
I'm quite used to.
Be yelled at by
Yeah,
creative personalities.
exactly. So I got it, and he always did a wonderful job.
He was really, and I never had a problem with him. A lot of people just couldn't take him, and they would just leave, you know. And all I would do is just bend my knees, lower my head a few inches, and right over no problem. No problem. I just got the good part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He could just move on. I always have to check because when I get in conversation, I will lose track of time.
Yeah.
It's just a thing.
I ramble.
What if you have to work? We're almost out of time. But I am so interested. I mean, you're here. You've said you're 87 years old. You've spent 60 years in this valley. You've seen change.
Wow.
If you had to pick one moment that sticks with you.
I heard you ask other people this, and I never stopped to really think about it. One moment that sticks with me.
Don't overthink it. Just like what comes up.
I'm going to embarrass myself.
I don't think so.
Well, you said it just the first thing that came up.
Yeah.
So I've always done a lot of volunteering,
Yes.
you know, at the art show and the this and the that and selling tickets and, you know, whatever. One of the earlier iterations of the Chamber of Commerce, you know, there's a lot of fuss over the years about whether we lived in Sugarbush Valley or the Mad River Valley, which would work best in terms of promoting the area, in terms of Chamber of Commerce, in terms of getting money from the state or from the feds through the state or whatever to promote tourism.
Right.
And what were we? Trying to pull it all together. Because we are indeed four towns, you know, Waitsville, Warren, Face, and Moortown, and sort of Duxbury. And so what are we? Well, we're the Mad River Valley. That's a big mouthful when you're trying to sell something. What you want is one word. And of course, we know what a major business in the valley would like that one word to be, Sugarbush.
Yeah.
In fact, originally, I believe the name of the resort, wasn't it officially Sugarbush Valley? I don't know.
I haven't run across that, but it could be true.
I don't know. But that rings a bell in some fashion to me, Sugarbush Valley. Anyway, so that was always a back and forth thing. And there were many attempts to try and put together a Chamber of Commerce or a business group or something. And a lot of that has all come to a head in the last 10 to 15 years. And seems to be in a pretty good path right now. With
Yeah.
a lot of us, a lot of more young, new people moving in who believe in this kind of synergy of working together and stuff. But at one point there was an organization, I don't remember the name, but it had a board of directors, and I was at that time, I think we were right in the heyday of the Blue Toad it wasn't a leading retail business because it was small. We never really earned a decent living from it. The community was too small to make just that one place work, enough for a family of four.
Yeah.
But there was a group, and I don't remember whether we called it the Chamber of Commerce or the whatever it was, and I was part of it, and I was the chairman. And our very first meeting was at the Northfield Savings Bank, and I spaced it and didn't show up.
And you didn't show up.
So that's me. What can I say? You ask, what's the one thing that stood out? And that's one of the things that come to mind because I have never been so embarrassed in my entire life.
Oh, my God.
I mean, we all space things, right? We
Right.
forget about this.
Absolutely.
But usually what we forget is a dentist appointment because we don't want to go.
Right.
Yeah.
Not a meeting you were going to lead. Well, with that, I don't think we're going to beat that story. So we're going to say goodbye to Tony. Thank you, neighbor. I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
And wave.
Okay.
And Thank you. Thank you, viewers.